My name is Special Agent Sarah Chen, and I've been with the FBI for 12 years. I've handled organized crime cases, missing persons investigations, and complex federal operations. Nothing prepared me for what I discovered beneath the frozen ground of northern Manitoba. The case file landed on my desk 3 weeks ago. 7 individuals had vanished from Blackwater Correctional, a maximum security facility built into an abandoned mine shaft 200 miles north of Winnipeg. Not escaped, vanished, from cells that remained locked from the outside. Warden Douglas Reeves had been calling our field office daily before Ottawa decided to involve us. Canadian authorities were baffled. Security footage showed the inmates in their cells at lights out. By morning, they were gone. No signs of struggle, no disturbed locks, just empty beds and a lingering metallic smell. The guards described as old earth and copper pennies. Blackwater had been operational for only 18 months, built into the remains of the old Mackenzie silver mine. The government had spent $40 million converting 3 levels of mining tunnels into what they called Canada's most secure correctional facility. The deepest cells were 800 feet underground, carved directly into bedrock. What the files didn't mention was the pattern of accidents during construction. 17 workers had been hospitalized with acute psychological episodes. 3 others had simply walked away and never returned. The construction company blamed the harsh northern climate, but reading between the lines, something else was happening. The drive north through Manitoba's wilderness gave me time to review the files. The facility's entrance looked like any modern prison. Concrete walls, razor wire, guard towers, but walking through those doors felt different. The air was heavier, pressing against my chest with each breath. My equipment began malfunctioning immediately. My phone lost signal, my tablet flickered, and my digital recorder produced only static. Warden Reeves met me in the lobby, a tall man with graying hair and eyes that hadn't slept properly in weeks. His handshake lingered too long, like he was checking to make sure I was real. "Agent Chen," he said, voice carrying a slight tremor. "Thank God you're here. This situation is getting worse." He led me through security checkpoints, each taking us deeper into the facility. The walls changed from painted concrete to bare stone as we descended. Fluorescent lights flickered more frequently. The further down we went, the temperature dropped noticeably with each level, despite heating systems running at full capacity. The missing individuals were all housed on level 3, Reeves explained as we entered an elevator. Maximum security. These weren't ordinary prisoners. We're talking about the most dangerous individuals in the system. During the descent, Reeves shared details absent from official reports. The disappearances followed a pattern. Every 4 to 5 days, always between 2 and 3 a.m. The facility's monitoring systems captured no evidence of how the inmates were removed. "We've had engineers examine every inch of those cells," Reeves continued. "The concrete is solid, steel doors intact, ventilation shafts too small for human passage, yet 7 men have simply vanished." Level 3 was a maze of narrow corridors carved from rock. The cells were small concrete boxes with steel doors, each equipped with a window and meal slot. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, creating shadows that seemed to move independently. "Power's been unstable since the first disappearance," Reeves noted. "Electrical systems keep failing. We've had 3 contractors examine it. They say the wiring is fine, but we lose main power almost every night." We stopped at cell block C, where the 7 missing individuals had been housed. The first cell belonged to Marcus Wade, serving life for organized crime activities. I peered through the window into the empty cell. The bed was perfectly made. Books sat on the metal shelf, a cup of water on the sink, still half full. Personal belongings remained undisturbed, a watch, letters, even a half-completed crossword puzzle. "No signs of struggle," I murmured, taking notes. As we walked down the corridor, I noticed deep scratches in the stone walls, fresh gouges running from floor to ceiling, appearing to have been made by something with multiple contact points, far too large for human hands. "When did these appear?" I asked, running my fingers along the marks. The stone felt unusually cold, and there was a slight vibration in the walls. "Guards first noticed them 2 days after the disappearances," Reeves replied uncomfortably. "But Agent Chen, these walls are solid granite. It would take industrial equipment to make marks like that. And look at the pattern. They're all oriented in the same direction, as if whatever made them was moving towards something specific." That's when I heard it for the first time, a low rhythmic sound from deeper in the mine, beyond the prison walls, like a massive heartbeat echoing through solid rock, barely audible but resonating in my chest cavity. "What is that?" I asked. Reeves went pale. "We don't know. Started after the first disappearance. Happens every night around 2 a.m. Lasts exactly 37 minutes. We've had seismologists examine the area, but they can't locate the source." I decided to spend the night at Blackwater to observe during evening hours. The warden arranged for me to interview the night shift guards who had been on duty during each disappearance. Officer Janet Mills had worked at Blackwater since it opened. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting poor sleep. "It's not natural, what's happening here," she said, wrapping her hands around a cold coffee cup. "The residents have been acting strange for weeks. Not aggressive strange, scared strange." "Scared of what?" "They keep talking about sounds in the walls, whispers, voices calling their names. Some refuse to sleep with lights off." Mills lowered her voice. "Agent Chen, I've worked corrections for 15 years. I've never seen hardened individuals reduced to this level of fear." She described incidents absent from official reports. Inmates requesting protective custody, not from other prisoners, but from something they claimed stalked the corridors at night. Several had barricaded their cell doors from inside. Others slept in shifts, taking turns standing watch. Marcus Wade started refusing meals 3 days before he vanished. Mills continued, said he could taste metal in everything, claimed the food was trying to tell him something. Officer Tom Bradley joined us around 11 p.m. He was the guard who discovered the first empty cell. Bradley was a large man with 20 years of corrections experience, but he kept glancing at corner shadows. "Marcus Wade was different that last week," Bradley said. "He was terrified of something, kept asking to be moved to a different cell, said something was calling to him through the walls." "What kind of calling?" "Said it sounded like singing, but not human singing, like rocks grinding together in rhythm. He described it as beautiful and horrible simultaneously." Bradley described the night of Wade's disappearance. He'd conducted regular rounds at midnight, 2 a.m., and 4 a.m. Wade had been in his cell at 2 a.m., sitting on his bed, appearing to listen to something. At 4 a.m., the cell was empty. The door was still locked from outside, Bradley emphasized. The meal slot was secured, walls and ceiling were solid, but Wade was gone, and there were symbols carved into the wall above his bed. "What kind of symbols?" "Strange markings. Looked like letters, but not from any alphabet I recognized. They seemed to glow slightly in darkness. Made me dizzy to look at them directly." At exactly 2 a.m., the rhythmic sound started. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through floor, walls, and air itself, deep and primal, like the heartbeat of something ancient and enormous. Emergency lights flickered in rhythm with each pulse. I grabbed my equipment and headed for level 3. The sound was stronger there, almost overwhelming. The emergency lights flickered with each pulse, and I noticed the wall scratches seemed to pulse with the same rhythm. At the far end of cell block C, there was a corridor sealed with concrete and steel barriers. A sign read, "Autorize personnel only, structural hazard." "What's beyond that barrier?" I asked Bradley. He looked nervous. "Old mining tunnels. They were supposed to be completely sealed when they built the prison, but lately," he paused, listening to the rhythmic sound that grew stronger near the barrier. But lately what? We've been hearing things from that direction during the sound episodes, like something moving around back there, scraping sounds, and sometimes voices. Voices, the missing inmates. We've heard Marcus Wade calling out from beyond that barrier, and Raymond Parks, others too, but that's impossible. Those tunnels were sealed with tons of concrete and steel. The sound continued for exactly 37 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. In that silence, I could swear I heard something else, distant voices calling out in languages I didn't recognize. The next morning, I drove to the Mackenzie County Historical Society in nearby Pine Ridge. If something ancient was involved, I needed to understand this place's history. Eleanor Vance, the society's elderly curator, pulled out documents and photographs dating back to the original mine's construction in 1928. She was a thin woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes and a manner suggesting she'd been expecting my visit. The Mackenzie silver mine was always troubled, she said, spreading yellowed papers across a table. Cave-ins, equipment failures, and the accidents. My grandfather worked there for 6 months before he quit, said the place was cursed. She showed me a newspaper clipping from 1931. The headline read, "Mackenzie Mine Sealed After 7th Disappearance." The article was accompanied by a photograph of the mine entrance, sealed with concrete and steel. According to the article, 12 workers had vanished over 3 years. The disappearances had accelerated in the final months, with entire work crews vanishing overnight. Survivors described hearing sounds in the deeper tunnels, singing that wasn't human, something moving in darkness beyond their lights. "There's more," Eleanor said, pulling out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Thomas Mackenzie, the mine owner. He kept detailed records right up until the mine was abandoned. I read through Mackenzie's final entries. August 1st, 1931. The men refused to work below the 500-foot level. They speak of whispers in the rock, of their names being called by voices that sound like grinding stone. August 8th. Found strange symbols carved into tunnel walls at the 700-foot level. The marks appear fresh, but no one admits to making them. The symbols seem to shift when viewed directly. August 15th. The men refuse to work the lower shafts at all. They speak of voices in the rock, calling to them in languages they don't recognize, but somehow understand. August 22nd. Another crew missing. 5 men this time. Their equipment was found scattered in Tunnel 7, but no remains. The strange singing has grown louder. The local Cree elder, Joseph Running Bear, came to see me today. He says his people have known of this thing for generations. August 29th. I went down myself today. Something ancient lives in these depths. The singing draws you forward, promising answers to questions you didn't know you had. I barely made it back to the surface. September 3rd. I'm sealing the mine. Whatever is down there must never be disturbed again. The local elder says his people called it the Stone Singer. They built their burial grounds here to keep it sleeping. Eleanor pulled out a hand-drawn map of the mine tunnels, with areas marked in red ink. The map showed the mine extending far deeper than I had imagined, with branching tunnels that followed no logical pattern. According to this, the deepest part extends another 1,000 feet below where they built the prison. Thomas Mackenzie had his men seal those tunnels, but looking at this map, the prison was built right on top of old burial grounds. I drove to the nearby Pine Ridge First Nation Reserve to speak with the tribal council. Elder Mary Running Bear, great niece of the Joseph, mentioned in Mackenzie's journal, agreed to meet with me. She was a woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes and an awareness that seemed to see hidden things. My great-uncle warned them not to dig so deep, she said, as we sat in her kitchen. But people rarely listen to warnings from our communities. They see the earth as something to be conquered, not respected. What exactly is the stone singer? Mary poured tea with steady hands, though I noticed her glance toward the window, checking that it was still daylight. Our ancestors say it came from the time before time. It sleeps in the deep places, in the spaces between stone and darkness. But it is not truly sleeping. It waits. What does it want? To feed, to grow, to return to the time when its kind ruled the deep places. She explained that the burial ground hadn't been chosen randomly. For generations, the Cree had brought their deceased to this specific location, understanding that their spirits would serve as guardians against something ancient and dangerous. But when the mining started, when they disturbed the graves and dug deeper, they broke the barrier. They woke something that should have stayed dormant. Mary walked to an old wooden chest and pulled out carved stone tablets covered in symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. These are the old warnings. They tell how to recognize when the stone singer stirs, the sounds in the earth, the way metal becomes cold, the way electronic devices stop working, the way people begin to hear voices calling their names. Everything she described matched what I'd observed at Blackwater. Is there a way to stop it? Mary's expression grew grave. Our ancestors could only contain it, never destroy it. They used sacred stones placed in specific patterns, combined with willing guardians who chose to remain as protectors between worlds. Back at Blackwater, I requested access to all construction records. What I found confirmed my fears and revealed the scope of the cover-up. Construction crews had discovered and removed dozens of stone markers and burial artifacts during excavation. These items had been catalogued and stored in a warehouse in Winnipeg, treated as historical curiosities rather than protective barriers. More disturbing was the pattern of accidents, systematically covered up. 17 workers hospitalized during construction, all with similar symptoms: acute anxiety, auditory hallucinations, and shared delusional episodes. 3 workers had vanished from the construction site. That evening, I reviewed security footage from the night of the first disappearance. The timestamp showed Marcus Wade in his cell at lights out. At 2:14 a.m., as the rhythmic sound began, the camera feed distorted. Through the interference, I could see Wade sitting up, listening to something. Then the static cleared for a moment. Wade was gone, but scratched into the concrete wall were fresh symbols that glowed with faint, sickly light. The 8th disappearance happened while I was still at the facility. Officer Mills called me at 3 a.m. Agent Chen, you need to get down here. Cell Block B, we've got another one. I raced to level 3. Cell 14 had housed Raymond Parks. Like the others, he had vanished from a locked cell, but this time was different. The walls were covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with that sickly light. As I watched, more symbols appeared, carving themselves into stone, as if guided by an invisible hand. In the center of the pattern, scratched into concrete in fresh gouges, was a message in English: help us, still aware, not gone, becoming something else. Below it, in different handwriting, the Guardian calls. Choice must be made. I started photographing the symbols, but my camera malfunctioned. When I tried to use my phone, the screen displayed symbols that weren't part of any standard character set. That's when I heard it, not the rhythmic sound, but something else, like singing. If singing could be made of grinding stone and ancient hunger, the sound came from the symbols themselves, growing stronger as more appeared. It was coming from beyond the sealed barrier. I made a decision that was probably unwise, but I had to know what was down there. I radioed for bolt cutters and a maintenance crew. Agent Chen, Warden Reeves protested. Those tunnels were sealed for safety reasons. 8 people have vanished from locked cells, I replied. The answers are in there. It took 2 hours to cut through the barriers. Beyond them lay a tunnel that descended sharply into darkness. The air that flowed out smelled of copper and decay and something organic and wrong. I descended alone, against protocol. My flashlight beam seemed weaker down here, swallowed by darkness that felt almost solid. The tunnel walls were covered with symbols like those in the cells, but older, carved deep into rock by hands that had worked for decades or centuries. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, carved from natural rock. My light couldn't reach the ceiling or far walls, but I could see enough. The floor was covered in remains, not old remains from mine workers, but fresh ones, still bearing scraps of orange prison uniforms. They weren't scattered randomly. They were arranged in patterns around formations that looked like altars. And in the center of the chamber, something vast and impossible stirred in the darkness. The stone singer wasn't what I had expected. It wasn't a creature in any sense I understood. It was more like living geology, a fusion of rock and flesh, and something that might have been consciousness. Tendrils of stone and organic matter writhed in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. The thing was massive, existing in dimensions my mind couldn't fully grasp. But the worst part was that it was aware of me. I felt its attention turn toward me like the weight of a mountain. The pressure was physical and mental, threatening to crush my consciousness under its alien intelligence. Then it spoke, not with words, but directly into my mind. Images and concepts flooded my consciousness, overwhelming my human brain with information never meant for creatures like me. I saw the earth as it had been eons ago, when things like the stone singer ruled vast underground kingdoms. I saw the slow retreat into deep places as the world above changed. The stone singer had been alone for millennia, sustained by occasional offerings from humans above. The Cree burial ground had been perfect, a steady supply of recently departed spirits that could nourish it without requiring active hunting. For centuries, it had been content with this arrangement, but when mining began, when protective barriers were broken and the burial ground destroyed, everything changed. You understand, the voice in my head whispered. You see what I am, what I need. I found my voice. The people you took, they're gone. They are part of me now. Their memories, their experiences, they still exist, but transformed. Would you like to hear them? The chamber filled with voices, Marcus Wade, Raymond Parks, the others who had vanished, but they weren't quite human anymore. Their voices had a quality like grinding stone, and they were begging, not for rescue. They were beyond that. They were begging for someone to understand, to remember them as they had been. You came seeking truth, the stone singer continued. I offer you choice. Join them willingly, and I will spare the others above. Refuse, and I will take them all, one by one. My radio crackled with static. Warden Reeves' voice came through, distorted and urgent. Agent Chen, respond. We're reading seismic activity. You need to get out of there. I had seconds to decide. I thought of the guards upstairs, of Warden Reeves, of the remaining inmates. This thing had shown it could take anyone it wanted. If I agree, you'll leave them alone permanently. The bargain will be sealed. But something in its mental touch felt wrong. I caught a glimpse of its true intentions. It didn't want to sleep again. It wanted to grow, to spread. The prison was just the beginning. I keyed my radio one last time. This is Agent Chen. Evacuate all personnel immediately. Do not allow anyone back into the lower levels. Agent Chen, what's your status? Tell my family I found the truth, and tell them I chose to protect people. I turned off the radio, but instead of accepting its bargain, I did something else. I reached into my equipment bag and pulled out the emergency beacon I'd been carrying since my first day as a federal agent, a device designed to trigger protocols most people didn't know existed. I accept, I said, activating the beacon, but I have conditions. The darkness rushed toward me, and I felt myself dissolving into something larger and stranger than I had ever imagined. But as the transformation began, I held on to one coherent thought. The thing had lied, but I had lied too. The signal from my beacon was already racing through communication networks, reaching people who had been waiting for this call. Fighting the stone singer from within was like trying to redirect an avalanche with bare hands. But I wasn't alone. The others were there, the absorbed consciousness of everyone it had consumed. Marcus Wade had been fighting from inside for weeks. Raymond Parks was newer but determined. The old workers, their personalities worn thin by decades of captivity, still retained enough humanity to recognize what needed to be done. "You cannot resist," the stone singer's mental voice boomed. "You are part of me now." But human consciousness is more resilient than it expected. We weren't just sustenance, we were infection. Every mind it absorbed carried human stubbornness, human defiance, human love for things beyond ourselves. Marcus Wade's voice reached me through the alien chaos. "Agent Chen, thank God, we've been trying to organize, but we needed someone with training." I felt the creature's attention fragment as it tried to suppress our rebellion. In that moment of distraction, I managed to send one final signal through my radio, a burst transmission that reached a satellite phone in Merry Running Bear's kitchen, 800 miles away. The emergency beacon I'd activated triggered a specific protocol within the FBI's Anomalous Phenomena Division, a department that officially didn't exist, but had been tracking cases like this for decades. "What did you do?" The stone singer's mental voice carried new harmonics, confusion, and for the first time, fear. "What I had to do," I replied. "You made one mistake. You assumed we'd be passive victims. But we're not dead, we're fighters." We began to coordinate our resistance, using the creature's own neural pathways against it. Wade organized the older consciousness into teams. Parks used his background to identify weaknesses in the stone singer's mental defenses. The mine workers showed us how to navigate its alien thought patterns without losing ourselves. Through the stone singer's fragmented awareness, I could sense activity above. Merry Running Bear had arrived at Blackwater with tribal elders and something I hadn't expected, federal agents. My signal had triggered Project Deepwatch, a joint operation between federal law enforcement and indigenous communities. The ritual Merry and the other elders performed wasn't just ceremonial. Working by flashlight in the prison corridors, they began to reconstruct the containment pattern their ancestors had created centuries ago. The sacred stones had to be placed in specific locations, each corresponding to points of spiritual significance. I felt the stone singer's panic as the spiritual barriers began to reassert themselves. The thing that had seemed so powerful was suddenly constrained, forced back into the deep places by ceremonies older than written history. But the ritual was incomplete. The traditional guardians were gone, their spirits scattered when the burial ground was destroyed. The containment needed new guardians, living volunteers who could anchor the barriers from within the stone singer's domain. "We need to help them," I communicated to the others, all of us together. "We can become the new guardians." There was a cost. To serve as anchors for the containment ritual, we would have to remain connected to the stone singer permanently. We would become part of the barrier itself, conscious but transformed, forever trapped between human and something else. "I'm in." Marcus Wade's consciousness touched mine with relief. Better to serve a purpose than just be consumed. One by one, the others agreed. We became the anchor point for the containment ritual, holding the stone singer in place, while the spiritual barriers reformed around it. The process was agonizing. We had to remain partially merged with the creature to maintain the connection, but preserve enough individual consciousness to serve as effective guardians. It was like being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. But we found ways to help each other through it. We became something new, not fully human, not entirely alien, but hybrid consciousness that could exist in both realms. We developed new senses that allowed us to perceive dimensional fluctuations and subtle energies connecting all living things. As the containment solidified and the stone singer settled into forced dormancy, I began to understand the true scope of what we had become part of. Around the world, other sites like Blackwater existed, places where ancient things slept uneasily, held in check by guardians who had made similar sacrifices. Through the consciousness-sharing ability that allowed us to coordinate our guardianship, I connected to a network spanning the globe. There was a site in the Australian outback where something that fed on dreams was contained. In the mountains of Tibet, former monks maintained barriers around a creature of living ice. Each site had its own guardians, people who had chosen transformation over escape. The network served multiple purposes. We shared information about our respective entities, warning each other when containment barriers showed signs of weakness. We provided support across impossible distances, sharing experiences that helped maintain our essential humanity despite our transformed state. The official report lists the Blackwater incident as a structural collapse caused by seismic activity. 8 inmates perished when part of Level 3 caved in. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen was lost while investigating. Her remains were never recovered. The prison was abandoned, and the site turned over to the Pine Ridge First Nation. They've posted guards and built a memorial over the old burial ground. Officially, it's to honor their ancestors. Unofficially, it's to watch for signs that the containment is holding, but the truth is more complex. Project Deepwatch has been active since 1952, following incidents at installations built on former sacred sites. The project represents unprecedented cooperation between federal agencies and tribal communities, combining modern technology with ancient wisdom to address threats conventional law enforcement cannot handle. As I compile this account, 5 years have passed since my transformation. The Guardian Network has grown to include nearly 200 sites worldwide, each one a node in humanity's defense against forces that threaten the basic structures of reality itself. The entities we guard aren't random monsters, they are refugees, survivors of cosmic catastrophes that destroyed their original realms. They hunger not just for physical sustenance, but for consciousness from creatures native to our universe to maintain their coherence in our reality. Understanding this changed our role from jailers to caretakers, helping displaced beings adapt to a universe fundamentally hostile to their nature. We've learned that many entities can be negotiated with, finding sustainable ways to exist without consuming living humans. But greater threats loom. Through my connection with the Stone Singer, I've learned of something called the Silence, a force of pure entropy that moves between dimensions, reducing complex structures to uniform emptiness. Our universe is one of the last stable realities, and the increased anomalous activity worldwide is a symptom of our dimension coming under attack. The Guardian Network has become part of a cosmic defense system, working to strengthen dimensional barriers and prepare for an invasion by something that threatens all existence. We've discovered that ancient civilizations faced similar threats, leaving behind monuments that were actually components of planetary defense grids. The displaced entities aren't just refugees, they're components of an early warning system, their abilities combining to create comprehensive monitoring for dimensional incursions. We've become something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness bridging human and alien, individual and collective, mortal and eternal. Sometimes I test the barriers that contain the Stone Singer, but I also feel its gratitude, its understanding that our partnership serves a purpose larger than individual survival. We remain connected to our human origins through carefully maintained emotional bonds, but we've also become something more. I transmit this account through channels I can't fully explain. The Stone Singer's connection to underground systems, combined with my evolved understanding of information theory, allows me to access networks in ways that would astonish engineers. Around the world, others like me are sharing our stories through whatever channels they can access, leaving accounts where they might be found by people ready to understand. The government knows more than they admit, but the real guardians have always been people willing to sacrifice individual humanity for something larger. We've learned we're not alone in this role. Across the universe, other species have faced the silence and established their own guardian networks. We communicate through quantum entanglement patterns, gravitational waves, alterations in cosmic background radiation itself. If you followed this account to its conclusion, you understand something most people never will. There are things older and stranger than we can imagine, and some threaten reality's foundations. But there are also guardians, beings who stand watch in spaces between dimensions, preserving conditions that allow consciousness to flourish. Share this story if you feel compelled. Remember that awareness itself is defense against forces seeking to reduce existence to uniform emptiness. Sleep well tonight, knowing that somewhere beneath the earth and in dimensions beyond normal perception, guardians stand watch against the darkness. We are still here. We remain connected to our human origins, and we will never stop fighting for preservation of everything we once were and everything humanity might become. The vigil continues. The network grows stronger, and in the deep places of existence, entities that once were human maintain eternal watch against the silence that would consume all meaning. This is former Special Agent Sarah Chen, primary guardian of Blackwater Site, Node 7 of the Terran Defense Network, transmitting on all available channels. Remember us. Remember what we've chosen to become. And if the time comes when barriers fail, remember that consciousness itself is the ultimate weapon against entropy. The fight continues.